Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the Tuesday, December 20th, 2022 monthly work session of the Planning Committee of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Planning Commission. My name is Kiba Samuel, and I serve as Chair of the Planning Committee. And we do not have any virtual protocols anymore. Take that out of my head. So we'll begin with introductions, starting with my Commissioner Seeley.
Clayton Seeley, Planning Commission.
Rebecca Wilden, Planning Commission. Shauna Neely, Planning Commission.
Rick Winiker, Planning Commission.
Andrew Blumenthal, Planning Commission.
And introductions of our city staff, please, beginning with Ms. Osborne.
Alicia Osborne, planning staff.
Zania Duhaney, planning staff.
Kathy Cornett, Planning Staff.
Maria Florin, planning staff. Gretchen Flores, planning staff. Robin Byers, planning staff.
Evan Lowry, planning staff.
Aaron Henson, planning staff.
Alberto Gonzalez, planning staff.
Jonathan Beller, Stormwater.
Thank you. If everyone has had an opportunity to review the meeting minutes from our November work session, and if there are no edits or proposed amendments, we will entertain a motion.
Wilden, motion to approve. Neely, second.
Motion by Wilden, second by Neely. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimous. At some point in this evening, my ability to speak will expire. And it is at that point that I will turn the microphone over to Mr. Vice Chair. So if you see that happen. So thank you, and bear with me as I work through. This is mandatory referrals. We have, I think, 7 of them on our agenda for this evening. Are there any that should be pulled for discussion? If there are none, a motion, please. We can approve these in one motion.
Some of the numbers would stay up there. All right. The Planning Committee has reviewed mandatory referral reports 2256, 2257, 2258, 2259, 5560, 2261, 2262 on December 20th, 2022. And the Planning Commission has no additional, Planning Committee has no additional comments for the submitting agencies.
So that was Seeley with the motion. Do we have a second?
Blumenthal, second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Easy peasy. I foresee in your very near future the yielding of about an hour of your time. So thank you. I think next on our agenda, we will have Dr. Byers. Visit with us and walk us through the implementation dashboard updates. As we are approaching a time where Planning Commission will be more accessible and visible by public, we also want to be best informed as we are interacting. And although we have likely visited the implementation dashboard at our leisure or individually, I felt it was a good thing that Dr. Byers walk us through the dashboard, any updates that have been happening since its launch over the summer, and answer any navigation questions that may come up. And with that, Dr. Robin, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you.
So as you guys know, the implementation dashboard went public in August of this year. And every year sequentially, we will be adding more data to it. At the 5-year mark, we should have the majority of data, and we will then be able to give it a fresh look per se, to really help us measure whether we're achieving the goals of the comprehensive plan or not. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Gretchen Flores. She's really been leading this effort, and she's going to go through the website as well as the dashboard itself to answer some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Just for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Gretchen Flores and I work in Robin's team. We also have Evan Lowry, who works on the GIS team, and they're really the brains behind the dashboard. So Evan will be here for any technical questions. So for today's presentation, we wanted this to be more of a work session. Trying not to get the feedback on the. Yeah. Yes. So for today's work session, we wanted it to be more of a demo as opposed to a formal presentation. So we'll kind of just go over some just general things for the dashboard itself, and then I'll go into the actual dashboard and just give you an overview of the interface. And then we'll save some time at the end for questions. So, and I apologize if you've heard this before, but we just want to make sure that we're all starting from the same place. So I'm just going to go over some just very basic information on the dashboard. As Robin explained, this is a new tool that was developed and is currently under development to measure the effectiveness of the comp plan policies. It takes a lot of currently a lot of the data from the quality of life, and much like the quality of life, it's going to be an evolving tool that'll continue to be updated on a yearly basis. As Robin said, again, the first iteration went live in August of 2022, and we'll continue to develop the tool over the next 5 years and then ongoing beyond that. And I'll explain more of what the next 4 years look like in a bit. So for the next update, which is the 2023 update, what we're looking at is some interface updates. So the interface will change slightly. And then we're looking to add more data. Currently, we have 25% of the data for the metrics that are in the comp plan. We're looking to add incremental data as either we have access to it or as it becomes available. And as we can figure out if we don't have access to it or have it available, how do we actually attain and measure the metrics that are in the comp plan? So to access the actual dashboard, you'll go to our CLT Future website, and then you'll click on implementation. There's a tab at the end. It's called Implementation Dashboard, and it'll bring you to this webpage. I wanted to point out that for this iteration that we have, currently, it's best viewed in a PC or a laptop. We know that the interface itself right now doesn't work best for on cell phones. That is something that we're working on for the 2023 update. That's currently being updated, and we just want to test it before making it live, basically. And that'll likely happen with the data updates as well being released later on in 2023. I wanted to point out that on the main page, before you actually access the dashboard, we do have a disclaimer saying that it's best viewed on a PC or a laptop. And that basically, when we were doing the current version, we had to basically make some decisions on whether or not, to release what we had, knowing that the cell phone version, the mobile version would come at a later date. So that's currently what one of the things that we're working on right now. I also wanted to point out that we do have how-to videos, basically. So this basically, they're two 2-minute videos in Spanish, one in Spanish, one in English, walking you through how to actually use the dashboard. So when we're ready to actually view the dashboard, you hit view the dashboard. on the webpage. It defaults to goal 1, so I'll just orient you on how, what the interface looks like. It defaults to goal 1, and you have goals 1 through 10 at the bottom. And then on the left-hand side, you have the actual goal language from the comp plan, as well as some additional information on why the data that's being measured for this goal is important to measuring how we're doing overall in the city for that specific goal. I wanted to just stop here and just explain what we're working on for the next 4 years. So in the next 4 years, what we're looking to update is, or what we're looking to do is make periodic updates to the interface, as I mentioned before. And as new technology becomes available, we'll continue to update the interface. We'll grow the amount of actual data that we have. As I mentioned before, we have 25% of the data. We're looking to add incrementally over the next 4 years, basically. Much of the data that we currently have, we get from the quality of life or some other existing dashboard or data sets that that was just easily accessible to us, which allowed us to produce what we did last year. We're then at the end of 5 years, we would be looking to basically do an analysis of how we're doing per goal citywide. And that's assuming that we have all the data at that point. We'll be doing a comprehensive analysis by goal of how we're doing, how we're measuring in the citywide for that particular goal. And then from that, really assess whether or not the policies that we have in the comp plan would need to be updated or changed or looked at, and how we would go about doing that. And I just wanted to remind everyone that since the comp plan is a living document, the dashboard is also going to be an ongoing process, because we want to make sure that we stay current in measuring how we're doing as our city and our policies continue to change and grow. We would just want to make sure that we're doing that with this tool as well. If you are all aware, there's also the annual report. And I just kind of wanted to remind everyone of how all 3 efforts work together. So the comp plan, the annual report, and then the dashboard. So the comp plan basically sets your vision and the policies for the city overall, for the city's growth and development. The annual report looks to highlight specific policies and projects and give it an overall annual, basically overview of how we're doing for that year in measuring up to the policies in the comp plan. And then the dashboard is really your technical tool to measure overall over the metrics that are found in the implementation strategy. How are we doing overall? Do we need to change any policies in the comp plan? How do we think that we need to change that? Are there any gaps? Is there anything that we're missing? Anything that we need to collect extra in terms of data? So if you are okay, if I can just go through and just do, if it'll be like a drive-through of how to operate the dashboard, and then we can save some time at the end for some questions. So as I was explaining before, this defaults directly to goal 1. There are 10 tabs across the bottom, 1 for each goal. To the left-hand side, you have the goal language from the actual comp plan. And then you have more information on why this is important to measure the way that we do, basically, why the metrics are measured the way that they are, and how does that marry up to the actual goal of the comp plan. Beyond that, we have some space for some citywide averages. These are either citywide or countywide. For this particular goal, it just so happens to be citywide averages. But these are numbers that are static throughout either the city or the county that we wanted to make available so that you can compare to what the measures are across the top. So across the top, what is actually being measured is the metrics that we have right now for that particular goal. So for goal 1, for example, we have 4 metrics available to us. Overall, for goal 10 in the manuals and metrics, we have 10 metrics. So the gap that, those 6 metrics that we don't have, that's our goal to get over the next 4 years. We need to just set some goals for us to set, or some priorities on how much data we're gonna get for each year. But essentially, at the end of 4 years, the plan is to have all 10 goals, or all 10 metrics, for example, for this one goal. So to the left-hand side of that, there's an arrow right now, and this actually tells you more technical information about the metrics that are being displayed. For example, for this, we have grocery stores that are being measured, financial services, and healthcare facilities, and it basically tells you all the technical data, like how that data was collected and how it's being displayed. And then it's got a link to the quality of life page, because a lot of our data comes directly from quality of life. We wanted to just to link back to just have an extra to have that as a resource as well. On the actual map, you'll see that this is displayed by neighborhood profile areas. And to navigate to either your neighborhood profile area, there's 2 ways to do that. You can either click on the left-hand drop arrow and click point and navigate to where you are on the map. Most people are not going to know what MPA they're in. So the best way to figure out where your house is, for example, is to type in your address in the search bar. So that takes you to where this location is. And then you'll see across the top, the metrics change depending on the neighborhood profile area that you're in. I'm just going to zoom out so we can just get a perspective on the map. I'm going to start from left to right to left because it's the easiest way to work this. But the base maps basically will change the background map. If you wanted to see an aerial, you can do that. You've got different options. But I won't click on these just for the sake of time. But you can see the different base maps that you have a choice. Your layers button basically gives you the option to click on and off the layers that are being displayed. Right now, for example, if we click everything off, you just see your background map. To just see your financial services, you can click on financial services and see that. If you click on the legend, it'll give you a value for what the colors mean, basically. We'll just go through a couple of these. Your proximity to grocery stores is another layer, for example, and then clicking back on the legend, it gives you the value for grocery stores. I won't do it for all of them, but you get the idea.
Does that normalized value essentially mean the percentage of people within that space that would have access within 10 minutes? Or what does that value actually truly mean?
So that's a good question. And that's going to depend on how the data is actually being measured. So for something like that, you would come here and say, okay, how is this actually being measured? So for grocery stores, for example, that value is basically a percentage of household units within half a mile of a chain grocery store. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? And it's going to be different for every metric, right? Because every metric is measuring something different. So, yeah.
Does it make more sense to say full service grocery store versus chain? I mean, like Giant Penny, for instance, on the plaza. I don't believe that's a chain, but it is a full service grocery store.
That's possible. It's the reason it's reported this way is because that's how the data that we were able to obtain is reported. Yeah. So just for a little bit of background, what we're doing on the staff end on the background right now is we're going through each metric listed in the implementation strategy and figuring out, does that metric really make sense to measure the way that it's listed in the implementation strategy? So that type of question is something that we're asking ourselves too for every single metric that we have moving forward. I mean, we're doing it for everything, even the ones that we're reporting on right now. We're really looking at them critically and saying, does this actually measure the objective? And if it doesn't, what else can we use? Does it make sense to measure it some other way? And where's that data now? Do we have it? What's it gonna take for us to get it, and what's the timeline that we need to to either get it, access it, or create it, basically. And that's happening right now. We're probably about 90% done with that process. It'll be an ongoing process for 2023 and moving forward from that as well, but yes, those are the types of questions that we're asking, so thanks for asking that. And then the last thing that I wanted to actually show you, yes, I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm maybe like 2 minutes away from that, but the last thing I wanted to show the group was, the home feature basically just resets the map at the scale that it was to begin with. Like if you wanted to go back and start searching for a new MPA and just get perspective on where that MPA is. So I'd be happy to take any questions at this point. Anything or?
So, just 1 second, Commissioner. So when the dashboard was initially launched, I think that was the same time we were issued the annual report for the comp plan. And someone who was reading a report in a different meeting that I attended was playing around on the dashboard, and he started asking all kinds of questions, most of which were user experience. I won't say user error, but a difference in the user experience. So my questions are more, I guess, critical to that regard. So they're very minute. Can this show up this way? Can this be repositioned this way, or what have you? But I will wanted to, as I'm trying to explain it to the person who was having this user experience, I wondered how many of our other commissioners had similar questions or similar experiences. So I thank you so much for bringing forth this presentation. We have a couple of people who can really nerd out on numbers, and so we tend to get very in the weeds in terms of the why this is measured, or the how this is measured, or what's your data source. And so I have a few questions to that regard, but for now I'm going to just kind of probably go around the DS to see if to check in with each commissioner to see what questions they do have. I'm going to begin with Mr. Winokur.
Thank you very much. And I apologize for interrupting earlier, Rick Winokur. So these, the parcel numbers, what are those? You know, like when it says 184, 367, is that the voting district?
No, that's the neighborhood profile area.
Okay.
Yeah.
And like one of the things I was looking at, you know, a metric half mile to a grocery store. You know, I live in a neighborhood that abuts Independence Boulevard, and the neighbors who live down at the end, well, as the crow flies, they have access to a chain grocery store, but it's definitely not in a half mile. So the whole neighborhood is painted one color, but definitely there are people in the neighborhood who can't access these facilities. Do you take into account the road barriers throughout the city? I guess it doesn't seem like it takes that into account. And so that's my question.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I would probably, I don't know, and I don't want to give you bad information, but I don't know. Evan, do you know offhand?
Currently, it's not, it's looking at the entire NPA, and I guess kind of averaging it or generalizing it. It's generalizing the entire NPA.
So
Okay.
whether or not the neighbors in the neighborhood can reach it in that area, you've just labeled the whole neighborhood one thing.
Yeah, depending on what percentage of houses within that NPA is within a half mile. That's the color that it would show.
Will there be ways to drill down on that data, you know, to see more specifically, you know, how much, you know, like for instance, if it's 50% of the household and that's your measurement and it's one color, versus 25%, you know, that sort of thing, to see how much of that neighborhood is actually within the access of the question, you know, the thing we're talking about.
Sure. At this point, you'd probably, to get down to that level of detail, you'd probably turn on the aerials. I think their current is of 2021 and maybe find the actual grocery store and see which houses are close to it.
And if I can
Yeah.
jump in here, I just want to point out, so the first year that we did this, it was really about building the dashboard. And so we used data that was already available and that is being measured and pulled already from other different resources. This is what we have available at this point. We have looked at, there is a differential sometimes in terms of, as the crow fly, half mile versus actual sidewalks. But for what we're doing here, we want something that's consistently measured, something that's available, and something that we can update fairly quickly. Doing something that detailed is going to be very time intensive. And we can certainly add that onto our list to look at kind of after we get a lot of this data. But at this point, we're trying to normalize for the MPA to help us figure out which MPAs have more need or less need. But we're really limited by our technical, you know, what tools do we have? And did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just real quickly, to your point, I think looking forward, how we would improve that is, and why we're kind of starting saying, hey, here's where we are today, here's the data that we have. As we're doing the community area planning process, that's when you start to look on a more granular level and redefine access. And then to help to shape the data across the board in terms of how we define what access means. So the start is kind of I guess a proximity, how close are people? And then when we start community area planning, we'll be able to look and say, well, what does access mean? Is it sidewalks that we need, bike lanes, roads, that kind of thing? How are people actually connecting to these uses? And what are the barriers and how might we improve that? So it connects to the work that we're about to start next year.
And I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
wanted to point out too, for instance, you know, there are bicycle routes throughout the city, you know,
Yeah.
number 9, number 1, whatever, with sharrows painted on the ground, but they're, you know, lethal. They're not really accessible by bike. And so I guess, you know, those questions I would have too, you know, in terms of like, sure, it's on a bike route, but it's not really a bike route. It's a
Yeah,
pretend.
Like Alicia was saying, part of the community area planning process is looking at focus topics like mobility, for example, which that would fall under the mobility topic. And we would be able to take a look at specific areas and does it have issues? What are the issues? How can we make it better?
I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with
Yeah.
and learning more about it.
Good work coming up.
Thank you for your questions, Commissioner Winiker. And I think one of the questions that I have, I think Alicia may have answered. I'm going to recap though what I heard just to confirm. So we're aware that there are limits to the mapping or GIS systems. And to help true up, so to speak, some of these numbers and to get around those limitations, we might tweak the criteria that we're measuring or tweak the metrics to kind of give us the real data once you get to the community area planning process. Is that fair to?
Yeah, that's possible. And I think it's also, what we also have to keep in mind is that we don't own or control most of the data, but we can start to direct or influence how we might shift to better paint an accurate picture of what we're trying to achieve and what's actually on the ground. So through the area planning process, we'll be able to collaborate with a lot of folks that own and manage a lot of this data. So we can kind of build a more robust set of metrics and measures to achieve, to reflect the goals and where we want to go.
Clear, thank you. Commissioner Neely.
I do have a question around transparency of these colored boxes. One of the things that it really seems like a detriment is the fact that you can't really drill in by road without turning off the transparency to see what's beneath it. I mean, I've been on GIS sites throughout the country And I haven't, and including our own Polaris and Charlotte Explorer. I've never seen that be an issue. So I'd just be curious how we can make sure these colors are transparent so that people
Yeah.
can see the roads.
Yeah, there's a,
And also, it did not work on Safari when I opened it up. I had to switch over to Google Chrome.
yeah, so that's part of the interface updates that we're looking at, just to make sure that it's opening across the browsers. As well as on mobile. There is, this is not responsive right now, but one of these layers does give you the option to overlay the roads. It does not, I don't know that it turns off the transparency in that one step, but it does give you an option to overlay the roads.
Yeah, I saw the ability to overlay the roads, but it still had the colors as a solid.
Yeah.
Instead of a transparent.
That's something that we can maybe look at and see
Yeah,
if,
because-
how.
Generally, when I look at these things and start to study them, I generally am looking at the color and then diving into where that actually falls, because I mean, honestly, some of these areas and the way we study them don't seem intuitive based on the structure of the neighborhood itself. So I think people are gonna find that to be difficult. So having that ability to kind of drill in and see what the rest of their neighborhood footprint looks like will make sense.
That's something that we can at least take a look at and see if it's something we can fix.
If I can add just about the technology, I want to make one point, and that is, when we started this, we had two options for technology that was available for us at the time. One could work on mobile devices, but didn't give us the ability to search by address and really put all the data in. So that's why we flipped it to this, but we do know that it's not perfect. It's going to be an iterative process. Again, like the Quality of Life Explorer, that was built year after year over, I think we're at 20 years at this point. We already know that there is an updated software framework, and we are rebuilding this through that will allow iPads and cell phones to look at that. We can play with the transparency. So we'll definitely take the notes back to the tech team and see what we can do. But I do want you to know that we are actively looking at that. We knew it was an issue, but we also know we wanted to get this built first, and then we'll go back and tweak it.
And I just have one other comment with the normalized value. If there's some way to have a script that pulls exactly what that is from the goal section, just so that it is a little more intuitive, less touch points for people to try to figure things out. Because I mean, I can consume this very easily, but my mom would be very confused. And I would like to say that 80% of the populace would also be a little bit confused.
Thank you for that. And I think Gretchen and I talk about this all the time, how we're going to iterate and how we're going to work on this. And so I think that's why we say in 5 years, once we have all the data. Right now, we don't have it all, so we need to show each layer separately. Once we get to a certain point where we have all the data, we can more intuitively show where we are on goal one, and then have all those data points. But I appreciate you saying that, because that helps validate that we're on the right path.
Commissioner Blumenthal.
Thank you. Couple of quick points and then a couple of questions. One to several other commissioners' points as it relates to data and how, I guess for lack of a better word, in the weeds we get. I think we want to make sure that we only get as granular on the data as we can while still maintaining accuracy. Because one, we don't own the data. And two, while all of you are already overworked, we don't have an army to go make sure that that's accurate, especially, I mean, looking at goal number one, businesses open and close all the time. You know, that's going to affect the data. So again, I would love to, say how far every individual house is from a grocery store, but is that feasible? No. So I would definitely respect the fact that this is always to a certain extent going to be a high level overview. And we could dig down as deep as feasible, but that's not going to be on a household level, right? So I appreciate that, and we'll see. I mean, obviously that's a balancing act, and we'll see how that works going forward. To Commissioner Seeley's most recent point, again, I am on Polaris Daily or Charlotte Explorer, and so there's an innate familiarity with how to operate GIS systems. I would agree that the vast majority of people won't be able to open that up and immediately understand how to use it. Not even really considering how to interpret the data. I think it could be helpful as we look at future iterations of this, incorporating some sort of a tutorial option that walks people through it. And that may already be done. Maybe I missed something, right? But if not, something that would be helpful, be like, all right, here's what this tab does, here's what this tab does, so on and so forth. If you want to address that before I go on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now we do have a video for how to basically walk through this current version. As the iterations change and as we do updates to the interface, we will also be updating the videos. Right now, they're about 2 minutes. It seems kind of like a lot of information crammed in there, but we had to do it. Like, we find that anything longer than that, people are not going to sit through it. So we really needed to figure out how to make it concise, but how to make it comprehensive as well.
No, completely understood. And I mean, what people have like a 90-second attention span nowadays. So I get it. One other thing, again, as we work through it, there is a ton of data in this dashboard. And even in government center, where I'd like to think we have really good Wi-Fi, it moves slowly. As again, we look at future iterations, maybe some sort of, to the extent feasible, again, some sort of a condensed version, right? That conveys high level information without getting super into the weeds. And then at a future time and place where you get somewhere with a little bit more stable internet, let's say, then you can get into something that is pushing more data around. Again, just a thought, but as the chairwoman and I are sitting here on our computers and iPads looking at things, you can just tell it's a little bit clunky, and this is going to be better than a lot of people have in their homes or in public spaces. Last question, obviously, you mentioned living document, that's a favorite word of everybody in this room. As we continue to collect data over a 5-year period and beyond, you mentioned starting to look at some policy changes that will be dictated by that, but you kind of mentioned that after that 5-year benchmark. I've realized that, without a full data set, sometimes you can't make informed decisions, but will we be looking at potential changes within that 5-year period if they're readily apparent, or are we just kind of going to set, an outside date, like, all right, we're after 5 years is when we'll start looking at it, but until the data is fully there, we're not going to really consider this.
So I'm going to try to answer some of that, and I'm looking to Alicia because that's probably either Alicia or Kathy is probably something you guys will probably want to weigh in on as well. But so from a data perspective, if we know that something is not doing what we need it to do, we want to flag that, right? We want to make sure that we're catching that as early as possible. Now, the comp plan has timeframes on under which it's going to be reviewed and updated. And I'm assuming, I don't want to assume, but I'm assuming that I think the first review is 5 years out. So our analysis kind of lines up with that. Now, do we want to flag something if we know it's an issue now? Absolutely. And we want to just make sure that we're thinking about how can we change that come the 5-year mark when we're looking at reviewing and updating the comp plan. If it's something egregious, I'm assuming that it's something that we would probably want to address beforehand. But I think that would be really readily apparent very early on if that were the case. And I don't know if you guys want to add anything to that. That's it.
That's it for me. Thank you.
And last. Again, most of my comment will be just from the few folks who have tried to navigate the dashboard. And I do realize that if someone makes it to the implementation dashboard, they have a level of tech savviness to really want to press that button to begin with, and will have at least a 3rd grade level of how to navigate the system. So I know it is not built for the everyday, I just get on my computer to check my email type person. that, again, the criticism that I've heard about the dashboard is based on a certain user experience. But some of the points that they were making were fairly or fair, I would say. The one thing is when you get to the dashboard, goal number one automatically pops up. Question came up, why can't we have a suite of goals, all 10 goals in that box instead of it automatically populating to goal one? I don't know. Again, I know some of the, especially when you're playing with this much data, as Commissioner Blumenthal said, there's a ton here. And you don't want the system to be bogged down at every step or function. But if someone is only interested in goal 10, they didn't know how to find it. So I saw that there's a ribbon at the bottom. Again, it's about the user experience, but why couldn't they just go to that left box and see the color coded goals and be able to select if they're only interested in goal number 4, for instance, and be able to select it just from there. So that was one of the criticisms. It's just, they didn't know how to get to the next goal. Like, how do I see the rest of the metrics for the other goals? So that ribbon at the bottom is not as loud, I guess, for some. And then just, I'm sorry. Yeah,
So that's actually one of the updates that's coming with the new interface. It will have the icon, so they're a little bit more prominent.
oh, good. And then just a level set, they didn't know what MPA was. So we're using an acronyms in the first screen. And maybe that's covered in the how-to video, I'm not sure, but using an acronym on the first screen was one criticism that I heard. And maybe there is space to put what MPA actually means and then MPA parentheses, and then going forward. There's a lot of acronyms in here, but for the people who look at this frequently, like Planning Commission or staff, we automatically assume this is what this means, but for someone who's just checking in monthly, it may escape them. And then data sources. That was the one question, and I know quality of life is what we heavily lean on, and that's pretty much what the program, the main data source that's in the program now as we continue to build. How frequently is quality of life data updated?
Most of the data is updated yearly or every other year. And we have it built, Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, that it will automatically, this dashboard will automatically be updated when that data is updated in the quality of life. Is that correct? Yeah. That's the brilliance of building this with that. The other thing I'll point out, goal 10, Gretchen, if you want to hit goal 10, goal 10 is about financial stability and whatnot. What's in here looks a little different than the other goals because this is our capital improvement dashboard. So this looks different, but again, this data is going to be updated and automatically updated with that dashboard. So we're not going to have a lag time between those. So that's the good thing about using data sources that someone else owns and operates, and they're updating, and we're building it that way. As we create our own data, I think that's part of the conversation we're having now. What metrics can we add? Do we have to create it ourselves? Can we get it from somebody? How often is that going to be updated? And if it seems like we have a data set, that's great, but it's only updated every 5 years, that highlights for us we need to do better. And let's see what we can find that's a little updated a lot more often and consistently. I've said this before. Some of you guys that have seen me numerous times know this. It has to be consistently updated because we don't want to add data that in 5 years is going to be measured completely differently. And then we lose our time series.
Yes. Agreed. And then what was the last note? Oh, lastly, if we could go back to any of the other goals, let's just go with one since we've been staying there all night. The percentages here, what they represent, how did that number come to be? So using the example that Commissioner Seeley referenced is the proximity to grocery stores, can that title be lengthened so that I don't have to take that additional step on the left. Because it simply states, when you open up that box, within a half mile, I'm sorry, chain grocery store. Is that something that we can add? Like, can that title be 2 lines instead of just 1?
That's something we can look at. I don't know the
Okay.
answer to that, but that's definitely something. we can
It
look
was just like, what percentage is that? Like, I know how to navigate it. I know where to find the data, but for someone who's wondering, or the new person, or the person who's just coming in here every 3 months, or again, just harping on that one goal, how can we make it as simple as possible? Because for me, that's not like a data feed. That's something that's going to be static. It's not going to change, et cetera. So can we just beef it up a little bit, the description? And that's, again, it was based on this person's or 3 people's user experience, and it wasn't that what they were looking for isn't there, isn't found, isn't available. It's just they didn't know how to get it, or they didn't know exactly how to read it. So thought I would pass those along. Other than that, this is very, anytime that you're measuring anything, it's time consuming. So updating, creating it, you're inventing the wheel here. So I appreciate all the work and effort that goes into this. So thank you all. And are we at the end of that presentation? Awesome, awesome. Any other final questions or?
From Winokur, if you want any beta testers, I'm happy to volunteer.
That'll be the next step, next year before we release everything, so we'll take as much. Appreciate it.
The goal is, if you guys can break it, we need to know that before it goes live.
Is that a challenge?
Okay, and I think Kathy, are we up next? Got my.
Now you have the academy.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I exited out of my screen. Okay. You ready, Maddie? That's right. Your microphone. Your microphone.
So I'll be going over 2040 Planning Academy. Some of you may have heard this before, but if not, so we just wrapped up 2040 Planning Academy in October. And so this program, formerly known as Community Planning Academy, it's a free educational program for citizens who are interested in learning more about the role that planning plays in building communities. So this program first began in 2016, and we last held it in 2019. And then we had a hiatus because of the pandemic. And then we finally brought it back this year. And so the goal of the program is to educate the community, empower the community to more effectively participate in planning processes in the city, and to build relationships with staff and neighborhood leaders and residents. Oh, thank you. Okay. So yeah, we opened the applications for the program in June and closed it in July. We received over 150 applications of people who were interested in joining. And then we were limited by the class size. We can only select 30. And so we have a scorecard that we score the applications on, and it was also based on geographic distribution of where the applicants were from. And then any applicants who were not selected were added to future mailing lists so that they can be engaged with in future efforts, and to let them know about future openings for the program. So yeah, so this is a map that shows where the applicants live across the city. All the applicants were either neighborhood leaders, advocates of bike, pet infrastructure, affordable housing and equitable development, accessibility. Some of them were students, some were long-term residents, and all had the common goal to share more about what they learned with their neighborhoods and their networks. So here's the program schedule. So we started with an intro to planning, and history of planning, both local and like national trends. And then we talked about community planning in the next class, then transportation, then zoning and rezoning, and then we completed the last class with urban design and community character. So all of our classes were held at Cordelia Park Indoor Pavilion up off North Davidson Street. Each class had different speakers for each topic, workbook readings, in-class group activities or take-home activities. And then following each class, we provided resources just based on the conversation and the discussions that were had in the class. And so all class materials is now available to the public online. So that includes the presentations, workbook, and those class activities. So anyone who didn't get to participate in the program or who has reached out since we launched the program, we can direct them to view those materials online. And so we had participant feedback surveys that we did throughout the program to get feedback for each class and then for the program as a whole. I'm not going to go through all of our survey results, but I'm happy to share that with you guys if you want. But we a few like notable responses were that people really enjoyed. We had Dr. Tom Hanchett join us for the intro class, and that was probably the favorite part of the program. But people loved collaborating with other attendees and having conversations about the past and issues that people have in their own neighborhoods, and the sharing and interactions of the students. They really loved the different activities based on the different topics. And overall, we had really great feedback. Again, happy to share more info on the survey results if you guys want. We will come back later to share more about the Planning Academy that we'll be doing in 2023. So we'll be back sometime next year to share more about that. And that's it. Is there any questions? And also thank you to Kiva, who Chairwoman Kiva, who joined us on one of the classes. I think the participants really enjoyed having someone come and who has taken the class before, and just like share your experience with them and what your role is.
Yeah, it's I think we stayed till about 40 minutes after the class, so there was a high interest, and so keep doing the Planning Academy is all I can say. I think that just not only here in Charlotte, North Carolina, but just throughout the US, I keep saying that people have an amplified interest now in planning, land development, land use, rezoning, preservation, things of that nature. So I think that this effort is 10 times worth what we actually see. So thank you for continuing. I will note that the map that showed the attendee, the class participation, would you happen to have the same data for the applications? Where the applications came from? Just curious.
Oh, all of them? No, we didn't in this round. I think in the next round we might try to, because we had to do that manually. So for the 150 we
Got
did,
it.
but I think in the future, after realizing that map was really useful, we are kind of just doing it by like zip code really. And but I think in the future we'll try to do it so that the application like does it manually.
Got it. And what's the cap for the class, the academy?
So so it's been 30 up until now. So
Are we looking at doing it semi-annually?
Well, we're like a
So
spring and a fall.
we have a growth plan for the Planning Academy, generally speaking, since we introduced it. So, but just different circumstances have not really allowed us to fully realize that. So now that we're entering into community area planning, that's a huge effort, not only for our staff, but for the community. So what Maria is referring to is kind of retooling it for this period. So how can we make the Planning Academy work better with the effort that we have underway? So that's what we're working on right now. So there'll be some sort of academy, not exactly this, that works with the community area planning process. And then once that's finished, the idea is that we'll recontinue with the one that we haven't. And yes, we do want to offer it twice a year.
Got it. I noticed that the number of classes looked condensed. Did we make a change there too? I think it used to be 6 or 7.
Yeah, so that's another thing. That's part of that growth plan is like, what's the sweet spot? Because I think the year that the class that you had, we maybe had tried condensing it, or maybe you went through the first one. I can't remember, but initially it was like 9 months or something like that. And we realized that once a month having class wasn't good. It was too much time between. So then it was a long duration.
Yeah.
So we tried to shorten it, but we're still tweaking what is that
Magic
what-
formula.
yeah.
Yeah.
this seemed to work pretty well. It was, the frequency was good, and it seemed like the way we paired things up worked pretty well. So probably stick around something like we had this time around.
Okay. Good. Any other questions for?
I just have one quick follow-up. When you look at kind of long-term efficacy of the Planning Academy, I mean, obviously there are people in this room that went through it, but one thing I'm sure of is that you keep everybody's contact information, right? And I would be curious, since you already do such a good job of surveying, at least let's call it the recent graduates, right? If you look at the people that went through this academy 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago and see from them what they wish they had learned now that they've had the chance to apply that knowledge a little bit, and also see where they are, like, are they using what they've learned? Right? I'd just be curious to see. I don't mean to always just ask people to do more work, but I think that kind of looking at that long range effect could also better inform what goes on like in 2023, right?
Those are great ideas. And we do have, initially, we tried to get the alumni network together through like a private Facebook page. That really wasn't the right mechanism, number one. And number two, it really should be someone in the alumni network that's kind of taking that on rather than a city staff person, because the idea is that you can continue to share information and keep in touch with one another, and that we can keep in touch to try to help, those that are new learn from those that have more experience and all of those kinds of things. So we're still working on that as well as we did kind of a call to action for the graduates if someone would want to take that on. Because you're right, we have had folks that have gone on to city council, planning commission, other boards and commissions, leading neighborhood groups. It would be great to kind of keep track of all of that.
Right. Well, my guess is that it will reflect very well on the academy. So it would be something that you can kind of hang your hat on and help market. Now, obviously, you have more than enough interest already. You took 20% of the applicants, right? Or they're leaving less, but still, it'd be something that would be fascinating to see is kind of where people end up with the knowledge that they gained.
Thank you. Oh, yes, Commissioner Gould.
Okay, it's working now. So I had a few questions. So number one, this is awesome. I actually used to do something very similar for my job with folks across the country. So like, I love that y'all are doing it locally. Do y'all partner with any groups like American Planning Association, Green Lining Institute, like those sort of places to kind of get the word out about this?
We haven't, in past years, we didn't do much advertising at all, and we would get twice as many applicants as we could take. But this year we did social media. That was
We did social media and then our like standard engagement mailing lists. Yeah.
And so that kind of tripled the number of applications, but that's a great idea too, is we'd also like to somehow partner with Civic Leadership Academy, where maybe, because we have had folks before that come to Planning Academy and are really looking for Civic Leadership Academy and vice versa. So how can we work together with that group and kind of pair up somehow?
Yeah. And then one of my other questions is this like a 101 level, or is this like a senior year type of class?
So it's kind of meeting in the middle, you know, like they always say to aim for the middle when you're trying to teach something. But the way we seat the class, as Maria mentioned, is that we have more experienced folks paired with those that are less experienced and very interested in serving the community more. So that's kind of how we've gotten at that. But it's not like if you don't know anything and you come, you're not going to be in any disadvantage for somebody that, you know, has either is in the industry or an elected official or anything like that.
And also the last one's more a comment, like, let me know, because I would love to help out with it. Thank you for all you're doing.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria and Kathy. And I think that we will close out the night hearing from Kathy about the community area plan update.
Do you mind Gretchen still doing the?
Yeah, no.
Lazy and let you.
Is there a thermostat that we control in here? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is right.
Yeah, you can just go to the next slide. Can you see my screen when I advance? Because I know you were looking at Maria. Or you want me to say next?
Yes, yeah, you can just say no.
Okay. So, today, so much of the materials you'll see in this presentation is really similar to what you saw as a full commission earlier in the month. And so moving forward through the community area planning process, that will pretty much be the norm, because we want to keep the full commission updated. But then this group really is the group that takes kind of a more in-depth look. So as we move through the process, you can expect to see your presentations being a little more detailed. At the stage we're at right now, there's not really much more detail for us to give you. So I'll give you that caveat. Having said that, I think it's a lot of information. And since you meet once a month, I don't think it hurts to hear some of it a couple times. And you may leave planning commission presentations thinking, well, I had a question and it came up, you know, I thought about it at midnight, you know, a couple nights later or something like that. So this is another opportunity to ask questions and things like that. So mainly we're talking about what the scope of the process is, kind of how we got here, what the scope of it is, and then focusing a little bit more on the January kickoff. So if you want to go to the next slide. So I know you all have heard this many times before, but 3 big projects over the past couple of years. So in June of 2021, we adopted the comprehensive plan. And then the first major implementation item out of that was the policy map, which the importance of that was getting the entire community on at the same level playing field as far as land use and development related recommendations for the entire community. Because the way it stood before, about 25% of the community or 20% of the community had much more detailed recommendations than the remaining 75%. So this has really got everyone up to the same level base. But we recognize that we need to take a more in-depth look, and that's what we're going to be talking about with the community area planning. But also related, separate effort, but related to these 2 efforts, was the Unified Development Ordinance, which was then adopted in August of 2022. So get the next one. So I mentioned that the comprehensive plan got everyone to the same level playing field as far as guidance goes, but it also, as I mentioned too, it recognized that there are some areas that need a more refined look, and those are throughout the community. So it really set the stage for future planning as well. So adopting the comprehensive plan wasn't just kind of like, and now we're done. It was really, we were done with the citywide effort, but then it introduces much more planning for the future. So the community area plans will build upon the goals and vision in the comprehensive plan, but it'll tailor it a little more towards specific areas of our community and talk about how those goals relate to those specific areas. So for some areas, one goal may be much more, I don't want to say important, but much more of a focus than in some other areas. So we want those efforts, again, to be equitable across the community, but we want to be able to be nuanced enough to focus on what that particular area of the community really needs. And things that we'll be looking at that we've talked about before, refining place type. So there's some areas where, because we used a pretty broad methodology where situation in one part of the community was treated the same as another, we may need to look at that and make some tweaks, and then that'll update our policy map across the city. Looking at other things that we've talked about here as far as in other conversations earlier this evening about mobility, street connections, for example, and then what are needed infrastructure projects to or parts of community parts of the community to achieve the best version of themselves, and then identifying any needed public-private partnership opportunities. So what's next? I'll touch on too. I mentioned that the UDO is a separate but related piece of this. So as a part of implementing the zoning portion of the Unified Development Ordinance, there will need to be, there is an effort underway to update the city's official zoning map, excuse me, which uses the policy map as its base. So you can't write regulations for something that you don't have policy for. So the zoning map is kind of, where can you build it? What can you build? How can you build it? Again, it's a separate effort, but because it's related, we want to maintain consistency and tell the same story to the community as we move forward. So in that vein, the two efforts I mentioned, they're separate, but they are coordinated. And one reason for that is to ensure that the zoning matches what the community's recommendation is for future development. Also, to provide clarity for the community about how the two efforts work together. It's really confusing, the policy versus regulation, for a majority of folks. So we want to continue to educate and try to get that message out there. And also, we realize that everybody, our resources limited, but the community's time and resources are limited too. So when folks come to a meeting or a workshop, we want them to be able to get all of their questions answered, no matter whether they relate to, the zoning piece of it or the policy piece of it or some other portion. So we're trying to design the workshops to be as much of a one-stop shop as we possibly can. And it's a 2-year effort. So our messages and where we can, our community engagement and all of those things will be coordinated. So I mentioned this earlier, there's actually 15 geographies, but I think we've mentioned before that Center City had just adopted a Center City plan. So there's not really a need to focus on that particular area. So 14 geographies that we'll be looking at. And that's where we'll be looking more in depth on, for that particular geography, how do the goal, vision, and policies within the comprehensive plan apply to that specific area? And what are specific needs in that area? And have a conversation about that and look more in detail about that. In addition, this will allow communities, neighborhoods within these community planning areas to kind of talk to each other, also recognize where barriers are between neighborhoods, and identify any citywide policy amendments that may need to happen as well. So in the past, we've done small area plans that focus on much smaller geographies than these, but the one of the drawbacks of that is that you're really kind of looking in a vacuum at your particular neighborhood and not how it relates to the greater community around you. So this will allow us to do that, and it'll also allow us within the time frame that we have to maintain our from an equity perspective, everyone having the same level of guidance continuously throughout the process. So we've talked about the key plan components again. So really it starts with the setting the stage piece of us doing a lot of work to figure out existing conditions for each of these areas. And then identifying challenges and opportunities. And those are things that we'll bring forth to the public, and it'll begin our conversations in those workshops. And what we plan to do along the way, as I mentioned, are recommending any needed changes to place type designations that may be necessary. And then identifying what are focus areas, what are areas of change that we can expect in the future, or areas that are transitioning that might need some greater attention to detail, like buffer strategies or other things like that. And then identifying neighborhood assets and amenities, and then any needed infrastructure improvements to help prioritize those for particular areas. And then again, on the implementation side, what's the phasing? Because we know that we won't have funding, or the funding won't be available, or there won't be the ability to do everything at one time. So what's the phasing look like? And what is the prioritization? Because we know our resources are limited. And again, these are living documents, as well as the other documents that we've talked about here tonight, the comprehensive plan, the implementation, the dashboard, all of those things. So process and schedule, we are in the pre-planning phase, and at the beginning of the year, we will have our citywide kickoff, and we're focusing a lot on sharing information, raising awareness, and I know you all are a very big piece in that. And then the workshops, the first set of workshops will happen in the spring and the fall. And then those will focus more on place type and zoning refinements. And then in 24, and that's for 23. And then in 24, we'll do again a pair of workshops in the spring and the fall that will focus more on projects and programs. And then all of these will go through review and adoption. And that, we've talked about before that they'll culminate actually in 14 plans for each of these geographies. And again, expected outcomes or what would be part of those plans. So maps and, categorizing what these lists of improvements are, kind of memorializing the process, and then what the recommendations were from each of those. In certain areas, I mentioned the focus areas, those will likely have illustrative development concepts, any kind of revised public programs that might be necessary. And then each will have an implementation strategy. And as I mentioned, whatever refinements are recommended to the policy map will update the overall policy map for the city. As far as our messaging goes, we've talked a lot about being accessible, equitable, and inclusive. So by accessible, we mean language that is understandable, and realizing and recognizing that that's different for different parts of the community. So sort of tailoring all the components of our engagement to meeting people where they are. And that also means providing different opportunities for folks and different ways of engaging. And inclusive means a variety of tactics at different times. So as you can see listed here, and we've talked about this before, translated materials, mass materials, online materials, social media, printed, all of those different things. And then also, in addition to that, being constant coordinated and collaborative. So having a constant presence, that there are materials that are out there that you can get 24/7. That we're talking and listening to as many stakeholders as we can. And by stakeholders, we mean not only the community, but our internal stakeholders as well. And we have a variety of ways of doing that. So in addition to the spring and fall workshops, we'll have focus groups. We'll have library office hours that folks can come and ask staff questions. We're available for neighborhood meetings. And then obviously you all are a big part of our outreach as well. And then working collaboratively with all partners. And that's not only our interdepartmental staff and the city and the county and other organizations, and also our elected and appointed officials. So right now we're in phase 1. So again, raising awareness, sharing information, promoting online. In the probably the first or second week of January, you can expect us to release a lot of information on the project website, and that'll include a video and FAQs. We'll have a newsletter that we'll distribute, and we have a database. I think this came up earlier of do we keep contacts for all the folks that have participated in, and we do, and we have about 26,000 contacts. And we'll also launch our social media campaign. So mentioning again the equitable inclusive opportunity, a range of activities online and hard copies available, and having those part of our community area planning toolkit as well. And so this toolkit really gives folks the opportunity to identify resources in their community, and they can do that as a neighborhood. They could do that individually, as a family, or with others. You know, it doesn't have to be a neighborhood organization, just your neighbors could do it. And there'll be a variety of ways to provide this information: oral history, visual histories. Anyone can participate. We'll gather all of that information and then catalog it and keep it. And then that'll be incorporated into the recommendations for each of the community areas. So your call to action is really spreading the news, sharing with your colleagues and stakeholders, and kind of helping to drive people to the website, helping to drive them to the toolkit and the other things that we have available. And that's it, unless there's any questions.
Thank you, Kathy. Some of this did look familiar, very fresh from our Monday presentation, but I do want to take the opportunity to go around the dais and make sure that everybody's clear and have any questions that they have answered. Commissioner Walden.
You said the second week of January, like a lot of stuff would be launched. Could you send us, excuse me, all of us are sick. Could you send us, okay, you're not gonna get sick, I promise. Could you send us an email like the day before, just to give us like a head?
Sure.
Okay, that would be wonderful. And I think that's it.
You're good.
I'll take my answers offline. Thank
Are you sure? I think I just have two notes. The first one is fairly, actually, they're both very easy. How frequent is the newsletter?
I think it's supposed to be monthly.
And if we could go back to the map that's showing the 15 geographies, it encompasses unincorporated areas.
It does.
Is there a, which I think should be included, because as annexation continues and because this is a long range plan. They're unincorporated today, but who knows what tomorrow, 10 years from now brings. But is there a different strategy or a special consideration to target those areas in the outreach? I know that we have registered contacts for different HOAs and community leaders within the city limits.
Mhm.
But is there anything outside of what you've already captured? Because obviously, we've had people who live in unincorporated areas participate in other efforts, but is there anything special that or different that we're doing to target those areas?
There hasn't been anything targeted specifically towards those areas. We just treat them as if they were in the city. And as a matter of fact, I think we had somebody in our planning academy from one of the unincorporated areas this last class period, class session, whatever. So we just treat them the same because they're part of the fabric of that particular area.
Okay, and that's all I had. Going once, going twice. And with that, we will accept a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, Wilden.
Quick on the draw.
Seconded, Sealy.
Motion by Wilden, seconded by Sealy. All in favor? None opposed. Thank you and good night. Happy holidays, everybody.